This is the first seminar this year, organized and convened by the Policy, Economy and Society research team of the department. And we're really delighted to have you here. Joanne. Joanne is a honorary Northern Fellow of the department, so there is an ongoing connection there. And also she has a lot of experience with the OECD in various domains, including education and skills. But more broadly, she has an interest and experience in thinking about citizenship and participation, in thinking about public governance, more broadly about education and skills policy. So quite a lot of things, I think, in common with us as an audience as well. And I very much look forward to your talk and to our conversation as well.
Thank you very much for your welcome. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Oxford. I'm very, very honored and extremely delighted to be here with you this evening. The path that leads me here is both public governance and education. And perhaps the subtext is really how can we weld those two communities of practice together, because we need to. And so I should say, just to start, as a disclaimer, I will be speaking in my own name, so all views are my own. I'm not representing the OECD this evening, not representing the OECD or the 38 member countries. But as an honorary Norm Fellow, I have the opportunity to really share a lot of data and insights from OECD work, but I really hope to draw upon the collective wisdom and expertise that's in this room. So it really is an opportunity to share some ideas that are developing and maybe issue a few challenges to ourselves to really step up in what is a polycrisis on many areas. But I want to start off with an image, and the image on the left is important because it's an image we know. We're looking at something that's entirely familiar. It's the planet Earth from space, right? But what's different about that? Why are we, what's slightly troubling about that photo is that it's looking at the Earth from the South Pole. Very, very often we have the Mid-Atlantic rift in the middle. Right? We see things, this planet we live on, we see it, it's represented in a specific way. So I'd like to invite everyone to take a bit of a step back from their day, it's been a busy day, and engage with the idea of changing our perspective, okay, on things that are familiar, things that we're expert in, but we do need to change our perspective. So that's the first thing. On the right-hand side is a photo of flax weaving from Aotearoa, New Zealand. And that image is there to remind us that there's lots of different types of knowledge in the world. And flax weaving in the Maori culture is a very important activity. It draws on knowledge about ecosystems, about where flax grows, how you treat it before you weave it into ceremonial artifacts or into useful everyday baskets. But it's also an invitation for us to think about truly weaving our knowledge, different disciplines of knowledge, together with other people's knowledge, which comes from lived experience in many cases. So those are just two invitations for us to, settle into an evening of asking ourselves questions more than finding answers. And today's a good day for that because the COP30 just kicked off today in Belém, right, in Brazil, but also UNESCO is having its general conference in Samarkand in Uzbekistan. And today is the day of, it's World Science Day for Peace and Development. So if you draw a straight line between Samarkand and Belém, Oxford's kind of in the middle. So we are at the right place at the right time. So quickly, my talk will be in several pieces. I want to explain to you why I think citizen participation matters and matters a great deal. I want to introduce the idea that skills matter for citizen participation in a meaningful way that perhaps we haven't encountered or taken into account till now. I'd like to share some scenarios with you, which are thinking scenarios. These are not fully fleshed out. I'm kind of counting on citizen participation in this room for us to get some traction on that. But what if people could build skills for participation in their daily life? And we'll get to that. But what if we were always exercising our democratic muscle in all the walks of life, not just in education, in schools, but in workplaces, in our community. What if? And the flip of that is, what if citizen participation processes could be designed with skills building and recognition skills? What would it even look like if we layered on the great and vast wisdom of the education community? I'm standing in the Department of Education here at the University of Oxford. What would that look like? And then I want to suggest we could move towards a shared agenda. Now, maybe just as intro, I should say that probably my entire working life, I have been fascinated by the sort of triangle of the demos, who are we when we decide, policy, so how do we make decisions collectively to address challenges that are real in our lives, and then the enormous impact of technology. And that's a triangle, or here it's a circle. But just to sort of illustrate that in 2 words, on the left is a cover of Foreign Affairs from 2018. This is pre-pandemic, okay? This is pre-pandemic. This is pre-2024, which was the year of elections, never had so many elections in the world. Already in 2018, we were saying, is democracy dying, right? So the crisis of our forms of democracy are known to all. I will not go over a whole bunch of data points. We're going to move on from that. But I think it's very important that we recognize a couple of things are going on. One is that image shows a ballot box, right? And we have lots and lots of data that you are very familiar with about the difficulties that representative democracy faces in terms of declining mass membership of political parties, declining voter turnout, a whole bunch of crises around representative democracy. Let me assure you that I'm not here to say we need to do away with that. That's important that we think very hard about how to reboot, strengthen our representative democracies. This is not something we can run away from. We don't have an operating system that's easily replaced, so I would not countenance that. But we do have to think about different directions of travel in democracy, because many countries have been experimenting very much with other forms. So direct democracy in Switzerland, they're the champions. They speak, strong and free and proud about how everybody could take the benefits of direct democracy. It's also very specific national context. So maybe this is a good place for me to say the world is not flat, and where we are and where we exercise our voice and agency and choice matters a great deal, okay? But there are other forms of democratic participation which are burgeoning, which are exploding, which are moving in the opposite direction of participatory processes, deliberative processes. So citizens' assemblies are the things that people talk about the most, but there are many other forms. So it's not quite as dire as that. And I am here to say that I'm full of hope that there's a lot of resilience embedded in our democracies, and that we need to say that out and loud and to ourselves to hear it and for others to hear that. Polycrisis, there's a long list. You can make up your own list of what you think is currently our policy challenges. You're all experts in some area of work, but clearly climate, biodiversity, geopolitical tensions, inequities and inequalities. And that's not a great moment, because we're facing all of these policy crises at exactly the moment that we're reshaping our operating system in a way to govern. And then, of course, technology. There's any number of slides that could go up here, but this one is just, venture capital investments in AI capacity and AI compute. So that's the physical world of AI. That's the data centers. The physical manifestation of AI in the last 10 years, it's just there to show you the direction of travel of that curve. It's going up and up. And that's in the physical world, right? With real environmental impacts, with real discussions about where these large servers are going to be planted, but also real impacts in our own lives, our own bodies. Those of us that work with children or think about youth are thinking about the chatbots that then actually become, manifestations of physical suffering. So there's nothing digital or virtual about AI when it suddenly ends up being quite specific in our communities. So if we're going to unpack citizen participation, I prefer to have a kind of less definitional approach to this and talk about what are the functional elements. So there's a great quote on the screen from the Minister of Local Government of Finland, who basically says, it's very difficult to trust something or someone that you cannot understand. If you cannot understand, it is difficult to have a voice. And that is just such a beautiful synthesis of what I think are the three key elements: trust, voice, and skills. And personally, I'd like to wave the idea in front of you that among the various rights that we should be talking about in this new digital age, a very new age in which our democratic institutions were not built for, we should be talking about the right to understand and the right to be understood. And I'd like to leave that in the back of your brain to see if you think that resonates. So let's unpack each of them in turn. As I said, I will be using a lot of OECD data. It's a data treasure trove. This is the OECD survey of drivers of trust in public institutions. It's simply on the screen to tell you that we have a problem. Over the 30 OECD countries, there are more people that have low or no trust. 44% of the respondents have low or no trust in government, compared to 39% that have high or moderately high. So we have, as a big average, it's an average over 30 countries, very different people sampled, but that tells us that we have a problem of public trust. But it's not the headline news that's most interesting about the OECD survey of trust in public institutions. It's actually that it helps us unpack what those drivers of trust are. That is the fascinating part of this enormous survey data, now into its second level of collection. So I have simply put on the screen something that is important for us to keep in mind, which is that when citizens and respondents to these surveys are asked about drivers of trust for complex policy issues, so not the simple stuff, but the really complex ones, there are three important drivers, meaning those people that say, for example, the one at the very, very right. So governments, if they believe the statement, governments balance intergenerational interests, they do a good job of balancing intergenerational interests, that's a very significant driver of trust. People who express those views also trust government. They trust national government. People who trust government to use evidence, the best possible evidence in their policymaking, they express high trust in government. And people who say, I have political voice, they express high trust in government. And these are very important drivers for us to be aware of. As you can see, there are many more, but I'm only focusing on the top three there. I invite you to go and have a look at this data. It's important that we recognize this because this is people telling us what makes them trust the public institutions in which they haven't trusted them with their vote or their proxy vote, or they're supposed to be getting on with the job of governing on our behalf. So it is a very important data point. In this world that we live in today, where do we get our information to make our illuminated decisions as citizens? Where do we trust? Where do we put trust in information? And I could give you a whole presentation on information integrity, on mis and disinformation, but we're not going to. This slide has to suffice, I'm afraid, but this is also from OECD data on the Going Digital Toolkit. What we can see here is that in some countries, for example, on the left, perhaps you can't see this, but like Colombia and Poland, over 60% of the people in those countries trust social media as a source of information, as a news source, okay? That's super interesting because we need to engage very seriously with what it is that there is on the feeds that they have in their phones. What's also interesting is the differences in generations, so in cohorts, age cohorts, Okay, so the little round circles are young people, young adults, 18 to 34. And the X's are people like me, 55 or older. There's a lot of us. But what's interesting is if you look at the US column, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 down from the left, there's a huge difference between young people. That's almost, they're pushing 70% bar of getting their information from social media. And that's far outstrips young people in other countries. What's really interesting, because here we are in the UK, is far to the right, absolutely at the end of the right, a far lower number of adults in Great Britain report getting their news from social media. But still, it's still 30%. So this is just about where are we getting our information from? What is the quality of that information? What is the plurality of that information? And again, we don't have time to go into that and unpack it, but we must be aware of the information ecosystem or soup that we all live in. This is again from the Trust Survey. I think this is, for me, a core graph. I'm going to unpack it for you because it has a very important message. And that is that on the left, you can basically see the difference between people who believes that the political system allows them to have a say. And that's the filled in red dot. At 69% of those people trust government. The 22% stands for the people who say, me and people like me, we have no voice in government. And among those people, only 22% trust government. Now that in itself, maybe we didn't need an OECD survey for that. We could probably figure that out from other research. But what's most important is that gap is the biggest gap. When you scrub away socioeconomic background, other factors, that gap of whether you believe you have a voice or not is the biggest trust gap. And just as a contrast, on the right is the financial concerns gap. That's the level of trust you express in government, whether you think you have some financial problems or not, which you'd think would be a very big gap, and yet it's smaller. So voice matters. It matters a great deal. But perhaps less often, we really very much less often talk about skills and citizen participation. And this is the Survey of Adult Skills data, which basically, I mean, it says similar things, but it's in a more granular fashion, that people that have a high numeracy proficiency report higher levels of political efficacy. Now, we know this from other data points. You know, educational attainment is correlated with a whole bunch of non-economic outcomes, right? So this is important because we know that higher skilled people report higher levels of efficacy, of being able to express their voice. The thing here is probably less about the comparative rankings of countries. It's more about the distinction between the high skilled and the low skilled within a country. I really would, you know, bring your attention to the gap between the highly skilled reporting their level of highly skilled in this sense, measured as numeracy, and the low skilled. So there are some countries where it's really far smaller. So I don't know, something like Norway or even Canada, the gap is not so large between the high skilled and the low skilled and their sense of having self-efficacy and political efficacy. In some countries, it's very pronounced. So what is going on here? These are not answers. These are just indicative areas where we should have a look. So my work really has been recently about considering what does this look like from a citizen's perspective? Not from the government perspective, not from an institutional perspective. And it's extremely confusing, the policy cycle. It is illegible. Jeff Morgan has written about the illegibility of power. It's very important to know whose door should you be knocking on if you want to participate, if you want to have voice and agency. But it's very hard to know. There's a lot of things going on in this diagram, but basically the citizen is at the center. This is a Copernican shift. You know, those of you that are policymakers or work with policymakers in government, it's usually about getting government policies done with citizens. This takes the other way around and says, if I'm a citizen and I want to get my voice heard in the policy-making system, where do I start? So the executive branch, I can push on the doors in my local executive branch or national ministries, the legislature, parliament, judiciary. I can take my government to court, or independent institutions. So Supreme Audit institutions, other institutions, ombudsman that will defend my rights. So there's different doors that I can push on, right? But that's just the doors. But there's a much more dynamic element, of course, and that's the policy cycle around the edge. And you have to try and imagine that this is all moving parts, right? Because it's not the same thing to push on the executive branch's door at the agenda setting stage or Parliament's door at the agenda setting stage. It's not the same thing to push on the legislature's door when we're already in implementation land of policy, right? So these are all circling quite furiously. I'm just not capable digitally to show it to you in a whirling diagram. So this is my lack of skills. But I just want to convey that this is about moving parts. There's nothing static about this depiction. And so how can you win as an individual citizen? How do you know what stage of the policy cycle are we in? Am I being asked to evaluate a former piece of policy? Is that what you're asking me? Are you asking me to do some blue skies thinking about a new problem? So knowing where you are in the policy cycle is like policy 101 for a policy person in a government ministry, but that's not evident to a citizen that wants their voice heard. So the report that came out earlier this year, and I'll mention it, I'll show you it later, but it's a challenge because we have done a lot in OECD countries for citizen participation processes. 20, 30, 40 years of activity, of sincere activity, and yet there's some still challenges. And one of them is that of the shared understanding. Are we sure that citizens and those that ask for their opinion and participation have the same understanding about what's going on? What are the limits and the opportunities that are afforded? The second one is the challenge of coordination. There is a real lack of coordination even across ministries or government departments, let alone across institutions of the state. And the challenge of alignment is one where if you imagine any well-meaning, well-equipped public institution, it kind of has a front office and a back office function, right? The front office function is providing information, possibly even continuing, launching consultations. But the back office is happily busily doing its job of whatever it does, social benefits or policing or whatever. Is there an alignment between the front end that's facing citizens and is offering an interface and the actual hardwiring of what's happening behind? And the fourth challenge is accountability, but accountability for what? In this case, it's a very specific accountability that citizens' input delivered to any public institution is a precious asset. Repeat after me. Citizens' time, attention, and participation is the most precious asset in a democracy. If that were true, we would be doing a very good job about chronicling that input, keeping it, feeding it to the next piece of the policy process, etc. So being accountable for what happens is important because citizens say, it's not that I wanted to have my way, but I wanted to make sure that I was heard. Most people can reasonably accept that the decision didn't go their way, but they will not forgive you if you have asked them their point of view, but then never got back to them, never explained the processes that followed. So these are some challenges. They're real challenges. This gets even more complicated, of course, when we're actually dealing with a world of multi-level governance. We do not make decisions just in Oxford City Council, because within our local institutions, we are embedded in a national level of policymaking, and we have global policymaking and obligations. So this is just a small picture. Again, it should all be spinning like plates on a stick. How is the citizen supposed to understand not only what stage we're in the policymaking cycle, but what level is this actually being decided? Where is the decision-making valence? Who actually decides? And we haven't really talked enough about that. I mean, up till now. These are just some examples, though, of how we can construct meaningful dialogue and meaningful social listening, not just consultation and participation. And a Finnish example is the National Dialogue Circles. And they've had over 800 of these since the pandemic years. And these are civil society led. They're just opportunities for very different people to sit down and talk to each other. It's not consultation. There might be some civil servants in the mix. It's not driven by civil servants. It's a way to create the social fabric of listening. National level, Brazil, not only are they hosting, of course, the COP30, but they have very participatory processes for developing their own climate action plan. And at the international level, I really must flag the work of the ISWE Foundation, which is founded and based in the UK, which is trying to create a coalition for a global citizens assembly that's like, think of a waterfall, but backwards. So the distributional effect is that we have local assemblies talking and debating about issues of climate in your local neighborhood, but that flows up to international policymaking. So these things are happening. I would like to posit that we're not talking about theory, we're talking about little bits of practice that's coming around the place. This is the report that came out in May. In a nutshell, basically, that there's a triple dividend that this is for governments. Really, it's a kind of report for public institutions. There's a triple dividend for investing in citizen participation, better policy, more effective policy, because you've listened to greater sources of evidence. Secondly, better trust in government. We know that. And also building citizen skills for participation. Participating breeds skills and capacities and appetite, arguably, for more. And it also calls for a renewed commitment to more targeted citizen participation, lowering barriers, ensuring inclusion. We have not cracked that nut. Measuring impact, ensuring accountability, and more importantly here, capacity raising, both in the public sector, among civil servants that are really not equipped for this work that is central to modern governance, and of citizens. So here's today's paradox. All of this just to tell you something you probably already know. Never before in our representative democracies have we had so many opportunities to be informed, to give our voice, to be engaged. And yet our trust survey at the OECD shows that over half of the people in 30 countries believe they don't have a voice in what government does. So we have to really engage with this and rethink. So this is where it all gets very speculative and where you're all going to be participants, in the sense that we know that there's a crisis of many things, but how can we overcome them? And we have an obligation to be optimistic, hopeful, not naive. So there's an urgent need to rethink this from a government perspective. How do we actually make this more real? So political commitment is necessary, clearly. Design of the processes and government skills. But we're not going to go into that. That's a different presentation altogether. The real issue is for citizens here tonight. How can we help citizens exercise their rights of choice, voice, and agency? And I'm going to focus on skills, but let it be clear, it's not just about capacities. There are legal barriers, there are barriers of discrimination, there are barriers of many types of exclusion, socioeconomic conditions. So I just want to be really clear that it's not just if we're all skilled participants, all of our problems will go away. They will not. But I want to focus just on this aspect. I should also say that also sounds a little bit like individual embodied skills. It's all that matters. So it's just like lots and lots of individually skilled citizens are somehow magically going to become an aggregate better. It's not a question of aggregation of our fully formed skills profile for participation. We need to think of collectively as well. How do we make those collective outcomes? So the second part of this is try to convince you all, but I'm in the Department of Education, so this should be relatively easy sell. It might be harder for some public governance colleagues, that skills do matter for citizen participation. And we do need to take this quite seriously. And we haven't probably so much. We know from lots of literature that skills levels have a huge impact on economic outcomes, people's employability, employment, wages, earnings, and also on important non-economic outcomes like health and trust and volunteering. So what I'm putting on the table here is that we should be looking at the full gamut of those skills. So cognitive skills, literacy, numeracy, very important. Media and AI literacy skills. The 2029 PISA assessment of the OECD will include a voluntary module about AI and literacy skills, which will be interesting. But social emotional skills, our ability to collaborate, our ability to empathize, and also metacognitive skills, our ability to know when we don't know or know how we know the thing we know. So I'm just going to skim by why these matter. This is just one data point from the latest OECD survey of adult skills, which is only done once every 10 years because it's a population-wide household study and measurement of skills. So it doesn't change that much in entire populations, so it's only done once every 10 years. This chart shows you over those 10 years, those two data points, 2013 and 2023, shows you that there wasn't a great deal advancing on adult literacy. These are people who are 16 to 65. So it really is the adult population in the countries that participate. There are 4 countries that have come out with stronger adult literacy: Finland, Denmark, Sweden, and Norway, over here on the left. And then there's lots of countries in the middle, not statistically significant. We can't really say if they went forward or backwards. And then quite a lot of countries that have gotten worse. So from the right, Poland, Korea, Slovak Republic, the US. And that's important because the OECD survey of adult skills is a great snapshot of the skills in your economy. And usually it's looked at by people looking at human capital issues. But what I'm saying is that we need to also look at this from a democratic participation aspect. What about social emotional skills? I mean, there's lots of work done on social emotional skills. You probably lead some of this work, so I'm on thin ice standing in front of you. But the importance of the skills that we are not going to call soft skills, because there's nothing soft about empathy and open-mindedness. You need to be quite muscular at times to be open-minded with colleagues or members of your own family. So these are social emotional skills: engaging with others, open-mindedness, collaboration, emotional regulation, that are absolutely critical to what we're talking about in terms of citizen participation. Because as our countries, our societies become more diverse, there is no reason to think that diversity needs to mean division. That is not true. It cannot be. So we need to cultivate all of these aspects that will allow us to participate together in very diverse societies for better outcomes for all. Going to move along here. Metacognitive skills, and again, I'm saying nice because there's people here who do a lot of work on where knowledge comes from and how do we know what we know. But this is just a graph from the Skills Outlook 2023, drawing on PISA 2018 data. And basically what this is showing us is a well-known phenomena in psychology that we tend to overestimate our own capacities. Generally, people overestimate their capacity to do something. So this is an actual measure of their skills. These are the 15-year-olds that had proficiency levels, reading proficiency levels at level 2 or below. This is almost illiteracy. This is really people that struggle to understand simple texts, and yet they report, if they're asked, so can you read and understand a complex piece of text? Sure, I can. Sure, I can, no problem. So all this is showing is, as it were, the level of overconfidence that people have. This is 15-year-olds, but it happens in adults too, in their own capacity to read. And that's important. Why is this important? Because it's critical in the information soup that we are in, bombarded from right, left, and center on information, facts, factoids, fakes, that we're able to understand when we don't know and stop and think and say, how do I find out whether I know or I don't know? Should I check this from another source? Shall I have critical thinking on my own capacities to read this or understand this information? And it's an important element. Societal resilience to mis and disinformation starts with these type of skill-based approaches where people can, in a way, be inoculated against the information, the negative, the misinformation, incorrect information they are receiving. So this is really important because it means we, not just 15-year-olds, but all of us have to really start thinking about what is our metacognitive skill set. Are we able to critically assess our own limits of knowledge? Who do we trust? How do we convey something that we got from someone we trusted to someone else and inadvertently often contribute to spreading mis or disinformation? So this is a democratic issue. It's not just a philosophical, epistemological issue. So here we get to the what if scenarios. This is where I'm going to need your help in the discussion afterwards. But what I was thinking is, how could we go about this? How could we, in a way, identify the skills portfolio, map it in some way, and understand what do we need to know of this bundle of skills at each stage of our life? So not just early childhood, not just in school, not just in university, but in our workplaces and as adults. And let's recognize that that learning and that skills acquisition is informal and non-formal and informal settings. But let's really engage with what we say there and make sure that we're clear about where that skills development can happen. And also raise awareness amongst our policymakers and our democracy champions who are out there, saying that we do have to invest in people's skills. You know, basic numeracy and literacy, for starters, is not it's not a negotiable for democratic institutions to flourish. And of course, there are institutions doing a lot of work out there. I will flag simply UNESCO's Global Citizenship Education Program. There are a lot of chairs, UNESCO chairs in global citizenship education. And Council of Europe has declared this year, the European Year of Digital Citizenship Education. So this is being looked at, right? So education for citizenship in the modern age is looked at from many angles. So my question to all of us is, what if we thought about skills portfolios and building skills as a muscle? And just if you use it or lose it. So if we're not participating in some way, in a meaningful way, in decision-making, it doesn't have to be government policy, in each of these areas of our lives, in what I would like to call everyday democracy, the more as citizens we have opportunities for voice, choice, and agency, and collective governance, collective intelligence, collective action, from school, certainly, but also in our workplaces and in our communities. This is an important question. So can we introduce the great depth of knowledge that happens in the education skills community, the professional and practitioner community, and bring it into this new agenda for democratic citizenship, which is not just 1 hour of civics with this is your flag, this is your national anthem, sing it at a football game, we're done. It's very different from the transmission of knowledge and values, important though it may be. It's about navigating our democratic rights. So we need to conceptualize this better and we need to operationalize it. Now, you may be asking, does this exist? I mean, are you talking about a real place or is this complete theory? And here's my little love song for Finland. The thing that we all get wrong about Finland, I think, is we keep seeing Finland at the top of all these global rankings. Education outcomes, PISA, life satisfaction. I'm like, oh, it's just the Nordics. Yeah, just the Finns, the Nordics are all special. Of course they are. Of course they are. And each country has a particular history, a long history, centuries of history of power and participation that influences today's choices. There's no technocratic, one country is the same as another. That's not true. However, the Finns are onto something, I think, because even just when you look at this sort of measure of outcomes, this is from the latest, it's the Finnish country note, the Finland country note for the OECD survey of adult skills. Most importantly is life satisfaction through the roof, 92%, amongst highly skilled Finns, 81% amongst low skilled Finns, but also many other valuable things like political efficacy and trust. So the outcomes are good. The outcomes are good, and they're consistently good on things that we think are important. But why is that? Now, I'm not going to give you a potted history of Finland. I would prefer that you invite a true Finnish person to come and tell you more about. But they have had a media literacy program since the 1970s. They have an approach to societal resilience, in part because of their history. First, I belonged to Sweden, then I belonged to Russia, now I belong to myself, which means that they are very aware of their position on the periphery of Europe, out of sight, out of mind. And so the Finnish approach to building many avenues for talking together about the future of the country, about everyone being capable and equipped in terms of their numeracies and literacy skills to be able to have that conversation is really quite remarkable. So we can't stop at the rankings when we look at Finland and then dismiss it. We need to know it's very specific to Finland. I am not suggesting that everything can be transferred, but they have a media literacy program since the 70s. They have the Eduskunta, the parliament, which is the first parliament in the world to have a futures committee. To have a committee, a bipartisan committee of 17 members debating the long-term future of the country. Not the next 5 months, not the next political term, the next 50 years. And that is a piece of institutional machinery which is second to none. In 2022, they started convening other parliaments, committees of the future. Now there's a whole group of them, but they are definitely the first movers. Sitra, I will mention simply as the Fund for Innovation. So it's been around for a very long time. It's not subject to any political influence. It was set up with its own endowment. It reports annually to Parliament, but it has a democracy strand. So it's not just economic innovation, new digital Finland. It's about what is the innovation potential of democracy in Finland. And I already mentioned the national dialogue circles. So I just wanted to leave you with this concept that Finland is working on several levels in several areas. And it's not by chance that we see these outcomes that we can measure comparatively. So the second scenario is the flip side, because for those of you that are very familiar with the technology of citizens' assemblies or deliberative assemblies, I will bore you here, but the idea of deliberative citizens' assemblies is that by sortition, a microcosm of the macro public will be brought together, for example, to debate over 3 or 4 weekends a specific and thorny issue and come up with recommendations on real political and policy issues. And many cities have set them up. Many have set up permanent citizen assemblies that sometimes stand by themselves. Some are done, launched by government. Some are extensions of legislatures, which is an interesting organic development. It's like the representative democracies built a third lung of a citizens' assembly that feeds into elected representatives' deliberations. But I put this on here because France has had several citizen conventions. And the one that was run in, I think, 23 on the end of life, which of course is a big issue being debated here in this country, it had a very interesting aspect to it, which was the Ministry of Labor set up a set of skills, like a list of skills and competences, and people who were participants self-reported. This was not a test of their skills, but they self-reported on what they felt they had developed or increased as skills. So that's kind of the first example I've ever heard of treating these citizens' assemblies as what they are, a deep learning experience. Deliberation, being challenged by expert input, listening to diverse points of view. That should resonate to educators because that's what you do every day in your classrooms, right? You try to throw the facts out there. You get people to have critical thinking and critical conversations. But what would happen if we were able to actually assess those skills as they develop through deep participation, deep deliberation. You know why I think this could be a winner as an idea? So maybe it's just me who thinks this, but because then the participating citizen is going to leave with something, a micro-credential, some sort, not just attestation, participation, not just I was here, like a participation piece of paper, although that's not bad, but an actual skills passport or a democratic skills passport. This is gold if they're applying for higher education, even in their workplaces. So why are we not looking into this skills aspect of deliberative assemblies? Question. Maybe it's too hard. Maybe I'm dreaming. And I'm going to conclude now because I really, really would like to have time for discussion. My thought here, and please be gracious if you rip it apart, but my thought here is that we really should think about a new compact for a research and action agenda which draws upon educators and researchers, policymakers, civil society, but importantly draws on citizens in trying to redefine citizen participation. We're going to need behavioral science. We're going to need education and learning science. We're going to need ethics. We're going to need our AI and technology folks. And we need to put the citizen at the center. It's not about doing it to them. It's about how do we increase everyone's agency and comfort. So I'm going to leave it there. I hope that this has helped in some way, maybe showing there's other perspectives on what we consider a done deal. There are no done deals. If there's anything we know about our democracies, if they are living, they are resilient, they have extraordinary potential for self-generation. But I would like to really suggest that we share our knowledge and consider an active agenda. And you can ask any question you want or throw anything on the table, but what I would really like to hear is whether you think this is a real issue. Do you think we need to build skills for citizen participation in everyday democracy? So is it a real issue? If it is, has it already been fixed somewhere and I'm simply not aware of it? That's totally possible. So please tell me it's fixed. And then third, how could we have a joint agenda? So I'm going to leave it there. I hope that was clear. I don't know if it was compelling, but I hope it was clear. And I very much welcome your thoughts and your feedback. Thank you. Thank you for this.